Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hello, this is the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you are a returning subscriber, hello, friend. Hope you're having an amazing day. You see what happens when you subscribe to the Ethics Experts? You get a bonus greeting on every single episode. So hit that subscribe button. I'm here with Jim Kerr, author of Indispensable Consultant. You're a culture guru. I don't really know where to start with you, Jim. You have so many different pools you swim in. Welcome to the Ethics Experts.
Well, Nick, it's great to be here with you today. So thanks for the invitation.
So I'd love to kind of dive right in and start chatting a little bit about your book. Backing up, we kind of became friends on LinkedIn. I followed you. I've done a lot of you've written a bunch of articles, you've written a bunch of books, and the title of your book and the subject matter of your most recent book, Indispensable, really resonated with me because that was something that was taught to me at a young age by my grandfather, actually, to be indispensable at your job, be indispensable to your boss, make it so it's very difficult for them to replace you. But you've taken this concept and really expanded it beyond an individual and out to a business. What drove you to kind of dive into this subject?
Yeah, you know what, Nick? It's been 30 years of management consulting work that led to this book. So I feel like this is the book. This is book number 6 for me. Wow. It is the culmination of 30 years of management consulting. And the whole premise of the book, it's called Indispensable for sure, but the subtitle is even more important. It's build and lead a company customers can't live without. And when I thought about it, when I sat down and started writing, I realized that there were some basic tenets that were true across the board for any kind of outstanding company. And I thought, well, I've been working in this space for so long. Let me share some of the things that I've learned. Let me talk about some of the great clients that I've had over the years. And let me give you, the reader a bunch of examples from industry that show that what I'm talking about actually works and makes a difference and makes a company the one that's preferred over any other in the marketplace. So that's kind of what the book's about, for sure. And
so when you dove into writing the book, like what were some of the big surprises? Like what path did the book go that was maybe a little bit different than what you maybe envisioned when you started?
Yeah, the interesting thing is when I sit down to write now, I've already got the book figured out. So by the time I get ready to write it, it's been, sort of percolating in the back of my mind probably for several months. Mm-hmm. And then it's just a matter of getting it all down. So the surprises were more around understanding that there's a formula to this that, if applied properly, could actually make a huge difference for leaders who adopt the approach. So it's as much a philosophy about running a business as it is a how-to. It's about a way of thinking about your customers, about your staff, about the culture you're building, and so on. And I think that was sort of the aha moment for me, was that it was something that was actually really transferable.
Yeah, it's like a formula or something. Did you find that as you dove into these companies that there was an intentionality behind the indispensability that these different organizations generated, or did you find any that kind of happened upon the indispensability that they enjoyed?
Yeah, I think in many instances it was lucky.
Really?
Yeah. I feel like some organizations kind of emerged. They had a really decent culture. When they got the right leaders in place, suddenly everything started to pop. The idea of being, sitting down as a leadership team and deliberately considering what to do in regard to culture or organization structure and so on, those tended to be done almost, as needed. It wasn't something that was done or designed up front. And part of what I practice with these companies that I'm helping is that you can be much more deliberate than that, mm-hmm. that you can develop these cultures and reset these cultures by design. And it's just a matter of approaching the work in a way that's deliberate and focused with an intent. And that's a lot about what I write about in the book, and a lot about what I practice when I'm doing this work with bigger companies.
So, I mean, how interesting is that people kind of happen upon this indispensability, and they sort of happen upon this formula, and yet you were able to find these these commonalities across industries and across businesses and really probably across time. What were some of the most, or like, what are some of those main threads that are drawn through these organizations that are indispensable in your mind?
Yeah, I think it starts with leadership. It's that old adage, everything starts at the top, and it's so true. If you've got the leadership team in place that can imagine the possibilities, that can envision a company that's so good at what it does that customers can't do anything but choose to do business with them, that's the starting point. And then I think the second piece is vision, being able to take that notion that, okay, we've got a really good team here. What's our vision? How can we articulate it in a way that's compelling and engaging, that informs the marketplace about who we are and what we're doing, and also helps our people understand about what company they work for and what that company's all about. So vision's the next piece. And then ultimately culture. Like, can I craft a culture that really dictates the way people operate, both within and externally to all the stakeholders, in a way that'll let me achieve my vision?
So we talk about continuous improvement a lot in our organization. We always want to be a continuously improving company. And the thing that we say is a company is never going to be a true continuous improvement company unless it's full of a bunch of individuals who are on their own continuous improvement mode. Do you think that same sort of like fractalization or like amalgamation style thing with continuous improvement translates for indispensability? Like, do you think indispensable companies are just full of a bunch of indispensable people, or do you think it's kind of a different angle?
No, I love that. I love what you shared about your company and how it operates, because I think it's so true. We need everybody sort of rowing in the same direction and operating with the same level of intent across the board. Now, the second part of your question is a little more challenging to really kind of pull apart and understand, because at the end of the day, how did you get the culture that you describe? How did you get it so people were always looking to optimize the way they operated and so on? That takes, I think, some deliberate action. Totally. And I think it's strong leadership, it's vision, and it's being able to do what must be done to forge that team of people to go out there and execute on the company's mission. So yeah, I think the first part is definitely so critical. You want everybody, doing their thing and doing their job and making sure things are getting done right. And then I think it takes some leadership and some vision to make that happen.
And do you feel like indispensability is like you're kind of only as good as your last, I don't know, they say it in movies, like you're only as good as your last hit. Do you feel like indispensability, it's like, do you think it's kind of like culture in that you have to keep stoking that fire? Or do you feel like it comes in sort of waves, like a company can be kind of indispensable for a while and they fail to kind of adjust? Like what did you see in your research as you were, I'm just, as you can tell, I'm like super fascinated by this concept in general. But like how did you see some companies that were able to sort of remain indispensable through different sort of eras, so to speak, and those who weren't able to, what kind of pivot points did they kind of fall short on?
Yeah, let's pull apart the different parts of that question. So the first piece is, can you sustain it over the long haul? And I think the answer is yes. And part of that answer are some of the other pieces of sort of the indispensable agenda that's laid out in the book. So we talked about leadership, vision, and culture, but there's all this, the sort of the second half of the book's about three other important aspects, right? It's the people side, it's trust and empowerment, and it's change frameworks. And I think you need all six of those things in order to sustain indispensability over the long haul. Because why? People is sort of that self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If we get the right people and we train them up and everyone understands what their job is and are excited to be there, then we can empower and trust them to continue to deliver. And the change framework is as critical because, of course, you're in a constant state of change. Why? Because new challenges emerge in the marketplaces that you're serving. You may have to tackle something you've never seen before or anticipated, but if you've got the right people and they're trained up and ready to roll, and you've empowered them, and you've got a culture that's based on trust, then they're going to be able to handle the challenge. And the change frameworks are the things sort of like the glue that holds it all together, because you want to be able to execute change in a repeatable way, so you're not relearning every time you have to do something differently.
Yeah, that's such a hard one. I mean, the obvious one that comes to mind is like Blockbuster. I grew up every Friday going to Blockbuster with my dad and picking a movie and all of that. And it's such an interesting story about how they really fell off. You know, I mean, I think there's like one Blockbuster left now. And it's not in the Smithsonian even, although it ought to be. But if you look at the like psychology of that, like it was almost like they couldn't let go of that identity, right? Like these brick and mortars everywhere, and you know they were like 7-Eleven, they were all over the place.
Sure.
That change framework, I don't know. I always have this like tendency to like want to force rank things. Like, all right, well, what's the most important one? And it's probably not the most important. Right. They're all perhaps like equally important, but where do you see guys like or companies really slip up on that change framework piece? That's what I'm kind of gravitating toward right now.
Yeah. I love the question and I love the insight. I think Blockbuster is a great example, but even going back further than that, think about a bicycle seat. What do we call those? They're saddles, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Why do they look the way they do? They're uncomfortable, right? Why is that? Well, they were based on a horse saddle. So, you know, when you think about it, you go, oh, okay. So the guys who were making saddles for horses recognized that the next trend was bicycles for transportation. So what did? They started making bike seats that look like saddles, you know. Right. But the thing you're pointing to is the idea of people being able to get past their paradigm blindness. So Blockbuster was blind. Right? They weren't able to see a world where you could stream movies, you know, on any device. So they thought, of course, we need bricks and mortar. Of course, we need to have stock in all of our stores. Of course, that's how we're going to do it. And when Netflix came along and said, hey, we can set up the rental element by doing the mailing for you, you know, there was no way no one's going to want to mail this stuff. You know, and they got caught up in the current paradigm to the point where they were blind to the potential of everything else that was going on in the marketplace. So in order to prevent that from happening to any of the organizations that we work with, we've got to help people see through the current way of doing work, their current business model, and help them see that there's a need for change, that there's a need to look at these things in a different kind of fashion and take advantage of the technologies and things that become available as they are being introduced into the marketplace.
So when you step into an organization, just as kind of a thought experiment, like this paradigm blindness can be an absolute killer that you probably don't even recognize until like the Titanic's already kind of broken in half and sort of sinking. Yep. So what kind of exercises do you like bring to the table, or what are the algorithms that are running in your head as you're trying to feel out for that paradigm blindness that might be sort of latent or might be a little bit below the surface in an organization?
Well, you know, a lot of it starts off with sort of some questions, you know, like what would be the absolute worst thing that could come along that would devastate this business, and really get a client to think about that. You know, everybody wants to kind of think of consultants as coming in and sitting around the fire and, you know, playing songs and singing Kumbaya and all that stuff. But that's not, at least not the kind of consulting that I do. What I try to do is get in there and question all of those boundaries of the current paradigm and see where there's vulnerabilities, and then help them develop strategies and stuff to offset those vulnerabilities. So, you know, it's about asking those tough questions. What if this happens? What if people prefer to not go to a store? What if they prefer to buy their stuff online? You know, i.e. Amazon, right? Yeah, right. But if we were talking about Amazon 30 years ago, it might have been a tough sell, right? People, oh, no one's going to want to do that. Well, guess what?
People want to try it on. They want to see if it's how big it is. Yeah.
You know, right. And then all of a sudden, what if I make it easy to do returns? Oh, okay. Well, now I got Zappos.
Right.
So now I can order 6 pairs of shoes, find the one that fits me perfectly, send back the other 5, and bingo, everybody's happy. Zappos made a sale, and I got to try on a half a dozen pairs of shoes, and maybe, who knows, maybe I end up keeping 2 or 3 of them instead of just one.
Right.
So the models that are flourishing now are ones that probably would have been considered preposterous back in the day.
Yeah.
But now all of a sudden they're there. And now you think of COVID, and you think of what we're living through these days, and you go, wow, thank God for Amazon.
Right. I mean, imagine 30 years ago. I mean, it seems so obvious now that you said that, but yeah, what would we have done? I don't know. Everyone would be eating beans and rice or something. I don't know. So when you're stepping into an organization, how quickly can you feel like how rigid it is and how flexible they are? I mean, you're somebody that's obviously very insightful. You seem to have like a good intuition, and you also kind of have this unique, just from reading your, the things that you write and following you a little bit, you also have this unique way of kind of like bringing it down to earth and kind of putting it into practice. But I feel like I can just imagine, as I run like a mental simulation, there's probably some scenarios where someone feels like they can't digest what you're saying. How quickly can you feel that out, and what kind of tactics have you learned as you've been in the game to help guys like open their eyes or reframe, the paradigm blindness they might be feeling, or the change mechanisms that they don't have in place to start accelerating toward that kind of, I don't know, promised land or whatever?
Yeah, the breakthrough thinking. Yeah, the thing is that, first of all, thanks for those kind words about my writing. I really do work hard at trying to make really complex stuff simple to understand. So I appreciate you saying that. And that's part of a good consultant, I think, as well. I think good consultants are good teachers. So part of my job, whenever I start a new engagement with a client, I tend to have longer term engagements. My typical engagements 3 or 4 months at a clip. It tends to be a major project. The leadership team basically hands the responsibility over to me to drive this thing on their behalf. So that's kind of the work I do. I sell a lot of the differentiation of my practice on the idea of co-creation. Unlike the larger firms that will bring in a bunch of really smart people, all MBAs and so on from great schools, with absolutely zero experience and any ability to create frameworks and stuff on their own.
I mean, it's wild.
Yeah. I come in with a different model. I go, look, you're going to hire the guy that's written the 6 books, and I'm going to use a bunch of your experts, people that understand your business far better than anyone from the outside ever will.
Right.
And together we'll co-create sort of the solution for you tomorrow. So a big part of what I'm doing when I do that is teach, and it's helping people understand how to think about those questions that I put out there, force them past their obvious answers, because let's face it, it's part of the human condition. You're going to give me the first answer that pops into your head, and I'm going to make you think past that. And once that starts to happen, that's where breakthrough thinking can occur.
So you kind of bring them into the driver's seat, or you're not like prescribing things with them. You're kind of doing a sort of, cooperative diagnosis or something, which I think is interesting. How do you think this, like, maybe there's a wrong term that I just made up, but like the blight of consultants, like how has that been allowed to, how has the thing that we just described, how has that been allowed to like be so prevalent in business? Like what you described of some guys coming in, some MBAs coming in and, here, do this. That's not like uncommon. That's like actually probably like most common. How did we get here,
Yeah. I can't tell you, Nick, how many times I've cleaned up the messes left behind by these kinds of firms. And it's not a shot at those firms. I mean, they do an incredible job. They've grown these incredible businesses. They're able to attract some leading talent from around the globe. So they do a lot of things right. But a lot of times, they aren't able to deliver the difference that businesses really need. And why is that? Well, part of it is that lack of experience on the part of the team. You're going to see the partner At the beginning of the engagement, during the selling process, during the wining and dining. You're going to then see them probably once or twice a month where they take you out to dinner and make sure everything's going okay. And then you'll see them at the end where, hey, here's the next thing I think you need. And they're selling again. So who's doing the work?
Right.
It's a bunch of folks that really haven't done very much of this kind of work. So for me, the value proposition is, hey, hire the guy that has done this for 30 years and has the track record and so on. Now, why does that happen? Why is it allowed to happen? I will tell you this, it's a lot easier to go to the board if a project fails and say, hey, I hired
XYZ.
Company X. Yeah, they're the third largest consulting firm on the planet, right. Versus I just hired Jim and Nick and they blew it. And then the question is going to be, why did you ever hire Jim and Nick when you could have hired the third largest, consulting firm? So part of it's CYA. But I will tell you that because of the business model I have, I don't have to make every deal. I don't have to sell every deal.
Right. So
I can come in after the bigger guys have been in and messed it up and offer a pretty, straightforward way to get things done. And that's worked for 30 years.
Can you imagine if surgeries were done in that sort of consulting model? You meet the great plastic surgeon, and then he's got the intern who does it, or the resident who does it, and then he comes for the stitch up or whatever.
Right.
It's crazy.
Right.
So how did you get to this point? Like, how did you get to this? I mean, when you were 8 years old, you probably wanted to be a baseball player. Now you're writing these books. You're doing these really cool, exciting engagements, really fixing massive problems. Sometimes cleaning up, sometimes bringing some real change to an organization. Tell me the story of your path to where you're at now.
Well, Nick, what was funny was I had an incredibly lucky experience early in my career. I was able to find a mentor who saw something in me to put me on a project that was being led by a consultant. And I'm talking about, I'm like a year or so out of college at this point, and plugged me into this thing. And the guy was talking about something that in a topic area that I had just, come out of school, and I learned a completely different way to go about solving that problem. And as a consequence, I challenged the guy, not so much to challenge him to put him in a bad spot, though he took it that way, but really to learn. I wanted to understand, like, where are you coming from? And have you thought about these other new techniques that I just learned, in college? And it got to the point where the guy was so challenged by me that he was trying to get me off the team. And I was, again, really lucky to have a mentor that was a leader there that said, no, this kid's going to stay on the team. And we got through the project, and a lot of my ideas ended up getting folded into the recommendations and so on, to the point where then my mentor sort of encouraged me to write an article. And I wrote an article, and this is back, I hate to admit it, but back in the early 80s when all of this was going on. And this is before there was, email and stuff like that. So you would literally have to write the article and have it typed and then mail it to somebody who
Amazing.
would open it up and read it and edit it and send it back to you with the edits.
With a real stamp. There's real stamps involved there, yeah.
Real stamps and paper and everything. So, so that article went out. It became a featured article in a major magazine. And then all of a sudden the phone started ringing, and I realized maybe I could do this consulting work that I just saw this guy kind of blunder through. And I sort of set my sights on that. And within about 4 or 5 years from that experience, I'd written my first book and launched my business.
Interesting.
And that's been 30 years later.
That's such a crazy story. So you wrote this article. What was the nature of the article, and how has your voice changed over time, if at all?
Yeah, well, I started out in a technical field. I was doing database work at the time, and I'd written an article that was a concept about managing data as a corporate asset. And again, you're going to have to go back in time. This is probably, Nick, before you were born, right? When this article came out. But, back in the old days, people weren't thinking about data as an asset. And I was recommending in this article that not only is it an asset, but it's one that's so valuable, it should find its way onto your balance sheet.
Wow.
And that was kind of a thing that I was talking about back then.
I mean, that's pretty radical.
It was pretty radical. Yeah. People thought I was nuts at the time, but what did I know? I was a kid, right?
Yeah.
But I really believed it. And I had some great professors that kind of turned me on to some really wild research that really wasn't all that popular out there yet. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of how I developed my thinking around it. And then I saw this in real practice in this company. It was a major Fortune 100 company that I was working with. And I saw how it could be applied. And the next thing I know, I mean, at age 24, I was an assistant vice president in a major life insurance company. Really? I had been recruited out of my first job from college and was in charge of data architecture for a major insurance carrier.
I mean, what a confidence booster that was, probably, right? I mean, I just remember being, a younger guy, and you have these ideas, and you have these kind of, I'll say I had kind of imposter syndrome. I didn't want to question somebody older, and like, you seem like somebody who's maybe always been kind of a curious mind, but also you have a confidence to kind of push these ideas that maybe aren't going to be middle of the fairway. Where do you think that came from?
Well, I always try to drive the ball into the middle of the fairway, Nick.
Very good. Very good.
But I love that expression, and I understand the question. Yeah, the thing was that, imposter syndrome was part of the equation for me too. I mean, I was coming into particularly the company that I was moving into was in the heart of New York City, in the financial area. There were all kinds of really bright people in the firm already. They didn't like the fact that this young kid came along and inherited, a good title where it took them years to get there and so on. But there again, I found a mentor. I had somebody that was looking out for me who at that place, again, a different leader, but, took a liking to my ideas and said, hey, look, I read your article and I want you to bring that here. And I know you're young and inexperienced, but I'll be there to help you through those things. You can learn what you need to learn about that stuff, internal politics and so on. But I need you to take these concepts and industrialize them for us. And that was huge. And I can remember walking down 6th Avenue in New York City and just after lunch with my mentor and kind of talking about this and saying, I'm really, I have like anxiety about this. People are asking me a lot of questions. I'm being asked to go to these and speak at these events around the country. I'm being paid to go speak, that kind of stuff. And I said, man, I'm just this kid, I don't really know that much. And he basically introduced me to the concept of imposter syndrome. And he goes, it sounds like you're a little afraid of being successful. And when he framed it that way, that was sort of the breakthrough I needed to think about. And it took me a while to kind of process. But once I got through the other side, I realized, that's what this is. I'm putting up this block that doesn't really need to be there.
And where do you think that comes from? Because it's not an uncommon thing. And I love that frame, afraid of being successful. It's a good reminder, but why are we so scared to be successful?
Well, there's that sort of thing. I think it comes up, at least in, I think, American society, where, no one's supposed to stand out too much. You're supposed to kind of be part of the crowd. And if you do stand out, then there's jealousy and there's things that you're going to have to deal with among your peers that isn't comfortable. And, so sometimes we default to the easier path because it's more comfortable.
Yeah, that's probably what it is. You don't want to be that shiny thing and have all that pressure that comes from it, and all the, right. To your point, the jealousy or whatever.
Right.
But I mean, we're endowed. I think everybody's endowed with greatness, and it takes a certain courage to really drill down to that well of oil that's below the surface and let that out. What great lessons to learn at such a young age. I mean, most guys don't learn that, if ever, until they're maybe a decade or more beyond that. And for you to be able to rocket up that J curve, I'm sure that created a lot of not only great opportunities, but but a lot of great opportunities for you to gain more insights and cross-pollinate those in your mind to bring more change to organizations. So let's talk a little bit about the culture thing, because I have always been, maybe not always, I probably didn't come out of the womb thinking about culture, but as long as I've been involved with business, that always seemed like this X factor in organizations that, and we say it ourselves, that culture is the only sustainable competitive advantage in business. You can invent a new iPhone, you can copy my TiVo or whatever, but the people who are doing the things that are bringing the value to the marketplace, whatever that ethos is or whatever that heart is that can't be replicated, artificially, right? Like I can't by edict say, okay, everybody needs to start caring now. So talk to me about like when you started to shift or realize the value in culture and kind of some of the main lessons you've learned in terms of how people can change their cultures.
Sure. I mean, sort of a way to sort of segue where we were a minute ago to the question now is, how did I have those opportunities? I had great mentors. Mm-hmm. So a quick lesson that I learned was you can't do it yourself. So now fast forward to companies and you say, okay, why is culture so important? Well, for lack of a better definition, all culture is the way that people behave within the environment. So American culture, what's that? It's how Americans behave. Business culture, company culture, is how I behave as an employee at Amazon or as an employee at Walmart or whatever. You pick your company, they all have their own unique culture. So if we want to build something that's sustainable, that's going to flourish long past our time there, we've got to focus on culture because it's the way people behave. And what good, quote unquote, looks like is handed down from the past generation, just like it is in American culture, right? It's being passed down from the generation before through the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and so on. Same is true inside of companies. So if I want to start changing the way my company operates, then I got to look at the culture.
So you said something. I want to come back to the mentor thing because it's been a common thread through a lot of what you've talked about. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the role that sort of tentpole mentors can have within an organization to carry forward this culture that we talked about. Like you just kind of described it as like what's kind of passed down from generation to generation. I've never really thought about it that way. And it seems like there's a role that like storytelling plays maybe from those sort of mentor types in creating that sort of perpetual culture from the next generation to the next. Talk to me a little bit about that, if you think that that's on base or off base, and like let's talk a little bit about like the role that storytelling can play in sort of helping to shape a culture going forward. Sorry, you just cut out. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you froze, so I didn't catch the tail end of that question.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the role that these mentor types are really the to me, they're like the tent poles of an organization. They're the 80-20 rule in terms of what they speak forward to the next generations to keep this sort of this perpetual motion machine that a healthy culture can be, going from generation to generation. And I want to talk a little bit about the role that like storytelling can play in framing out what those values are as we carry them forward.
Okay, yeah. And that's exactly how that happens, right? It's through that storytelling. And anyone, not just the formal leadership, but anyone that's influential inside an organization has the ability to tell stories about the organization that those that are interested will pick up on and learn from and make their own. And that's really how that happens. It gets moved along as people adopt the previous sort of generation's point of view. That's not to say there's no change. There's absolutely constant change, but the idea is they understand what's important and then they try to make that even better. And that happens again by hiring the right people and putting them in the right spots and empowering them and trusting them to do the right things. The more you do that, the more you perpetuate your culture. If you're a control freak and you're going to control every action and everything has to be approved, well, guess what? You're going to create a culture that's really tight and hard to maneuver in, that makes people feel uncomfortable, that's less productive, that gets, that makes less value than it could produce if it was, unleashed. So the choice is ours. And if we can build the right team and cultivate the right culture, then the sky's the limit. You can be indispensable.
So what are your favorite kind of engagements? Because you do a bunch of different kind of consulting, right? I mean, we were talking, sometimes you're a sounding board, sometimes you're coming in to drive change, sometimes you're doing culture stuff. What are your favorite kinds of engagements, and what are some of the like early, I don't want to call them red flags, but just like early indicators that you find as you step into one where you're like, okay, this is going to be a juicy one, and you're like cracking your knuckles and you're like, okay, there's a lot of impact that I'm going to be able to make here. What are some of those kind of dynamics that you see early?
Yeah, well, generally speaking, people aren't bringing me in when everything's hunky-dory, right? They're bringing me in when the place is on fire. So I'm typically parachuting into a situation where there's definitely a problem that needs to get fixed. And I have to quickly assess who's who on the floor and who can I build a trust relationship with, who is going to give me good insight, good advice. And I try to build a team around me that are, from within the organization, but they're people that can become trusted advisors. And then in turn, I can become a trusted advisor to them. So it's being able to kind of come in and quickly assess where I've just landed. The elements that make a good engagement, fun and exciting and so on, is how critical is this piece of work to the success of the business. If you're hiring me to come in and do a strategy project, that can be pretty huge, because that can make or break the next 5 to 10 years of investment within that company.
Right.
So it's heady stuff. If you bring me in to do some organization design stuff, that's pretty important too, because I may have to make hiring and firing decisions, and I'm going to impact people's lives, because everybody's got, rent to pay or mortgage payment or kids in college or whatever. And I've got to be really thoughtful about how I go about that kind of work. And then the coaching stuff is really more of a one-on-one, and I get great satisfaction when I see somebody that really wants to learn and is taking some of the stuff that I'm trying to impart and applying it. Because the coaching relationship typically is one that's going to last, 6 months, even longer. And I want people to take what we're talking about and use it and see how they do with it and make them better. And again, the joy, if you will, that I get out of that kind of work is seeing someone really grow and become. I was working with 3 different people last year, same company. All were considered high potential employees. All 3 have since been promoted into
awesome.
sort of senior leader roles. So yeah, so it's so great when that happens, because you can see like, wow, when we were working together 9 months ago, you probably weren't going to be able to get there, and now you're there. So
yeah, how rewarding is that, right? And I'm sure the path that each one took was different, and the tips you gave each one was different, because they all had their own backgrounds and they were at their different points on their kind of career trajectory. But
absolutely,
that's so cool. So you talked a lot about being a trusted advisor, and I don't think you can ever drive change in an organization until you have some level of trust, or you're just walking around with like a hammer or a riding crop or something like that. So I think. But there's this interesting balance when you're coming in from the outside, I think, because you need to build trust, but you also need to build some credibility. How do you kind of navigate both of those things without coming in like a know-it-all, but also not coming in like, a wet blanket?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, personal styles are all different. I've kind of developed one where I feel, anyway, that I project somebody that's really laid back. So when I'm introducing something that might be controversial or, challenging for a company, something provocative, whatever, it's usually presented in, oh, golly shucks, have we thought about this kind of way?
Mm-hmm.
So it's less intimidating, I think. Now I could be totally wrong, but that's who I am, so I'm presenting it in that kind of an authentic, golly shucks, way. And because I don't need to come in and go, I'm an expert. If you've hired me, you already think I have something I can bring to the table. So I don't have to keep doing that. What I do have to do is make a difference once you let me in. And the best way for me to make a difference is, like I say, surround myself with some really good people from within, and then bring that team forward with me as we drive change.
As we're talking about cultures, do you feel like there's a tipping point of like org size or complexity that makes it sort of exponentially more difficult to maintain a culture? And how have you seen folks either fail or succeed in sort of maintaining their special culture in this sort of post-COVID world that we're in now?
Well, first of all, I think there's great challenges to culture in general because of COVID. If for no other reason, we're heading into a world that is sort of a hybrid workplace, at least.
Yeah.
Right. And that introduces some real challenges to existing culture. Now, that said, I think if you've got a solid culture or had a solid culture pre-COVID, chances are you've survived a lot better than those companies that didn't. If you had a really lousy culture to begin with, my guess is it's gotten even worse due to COVID, right? But
yeah, it's like the great revealer or something.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a lot of work to be done right now in culture reset. I think we've got to reset our culture so that they can accommodate the new way of working. And that means it's not just as simple as, sometimes you're on a Zoom call, sometimes you're in the office. If it was just that, that'd be fine. But I don't think it's just that. I think it's redefining roles. I think it's redefining decision support infrastructures. I think it's about making sure you've got the right kind of support in place to help people get their work done, because the support infrastructure looks a lot different when everyone's in the office every day than when it's remote and when it's spread out potentially across the world. So culture is going to be a piece of work, I think, for a lot of companies for probably the next several years.
I think you're spot on. I think you're right. And I think to the extent that we can't change and morph and, kind of shift through this paradigm, or kind of adapt through this paradigm shift that like we're all living through, there's going to be a massive separation of organizations and frankly experiences within those organizations as we move forward. Changing gears a little bit, I'd love to hear, you're somebody who it seems like you have this common thread of, there's been a refrain of mentors. For somebody that hasn't been blessed with mentors in their life, what advice would you give them to go and find them and create those meaningful mentor relationships beyond those that are like by diktat, passed down within the company, which never seem to be as like valuable as the informal ones,
Yeah, I would agree. Well, I mean, again, sharing from my own experiences, in each instance, I sought out the guidance of someone that I was learning to respect and who had more experience and more time in the company. Mm-hmm. So part of the onus is on the person that wants a mentor, that wants to learn from somebody. And it's about reaching out and asking those questions of whatever it is you're being challenged by or struggling with, and asking for advice. And I think by just getting that to happen begins the relationship building that's necessary to ultimately create that mentor-mentee kind of thing. I write a column for Inc. magazine, and a few years back, I think it might have even been as long ago as 2016, I wrote an article about that, about mentorship and about the fact that sort of next gen worker has to be willing to reach out and talk to people and build a relationship with folks they can learn from. And I highly recommend that. As far as the formal mentorship stuff, I mean, yes, I do promote that in some of the coaching work that I do, mostly to help those younger, less experienced people that tend to be part of like a a cohort, a coaching cohort, to build the relationships that they need. So you force that a little bit by introducing a mentorship type of program on top of the coaching that enables them to build relationships. So if you're say you're an accounting person in the finance department, and we create a mentorship program where you get to spend an hour a month with the CFO, that's huge for you.
Totally. Yeah.
And that creates at least that ability to say, hey, I know somebody there, they're talking about the right things. And if that person's a decent person, a good leader, then they're going to make the effort to help that younger, less experienced person learn from their experience. So it can work, but I, to your point, I think it's always best to find the mentors that work for you, because you click. There's some kind of chemistry or something that enables you to build that relationship.
I mean, it is perhaps the biggest sort of career and learning accelerant that you can inject into your own life. You know what I'm saying?
I think so. Yeah. For sure.
So, as we wrap up, I love asking this question, but if you could go back in time to find a young Jim, maybe even before you wrote that article, or maybe right as you're getting out of school, or maybe when you're in high school, what advice do you wish that you had then?
Well, maybe, yeah, that's a really tough question. And I guess maybe because I'm at sort of the other end of that now, 30 years later, I can see it more clearly. But I guess it would be reminding me that it doesn't all have to be about work. You know, I came into the workplace at a time where it was promoted that work was a good thing. The harder you worked, the more you were going to be able to achieve. I think there's a point of diminishing returns, however, with that, adopting that philosophy. I think you can also work so hard you burn out. And I think that's a tough lesson to learn along the way. So if you can avoid burnout by keeping some balance, then I think you can achieve some great things and still remain mentally healthy as you do.
I love that advice. Yeah, burnout is a real thing, and it's hard to know where that limit is, and it's hard to know the sort of the ripple effects of the decisions that we're making. But I just love that question. It's like I just get bombarded with so much great advice from people I look up to and so forth. So I love your work. I love your book and your writing. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so check out the website. It's indispensable-consulting.com. And there's a lot of articles out there. There's more information about the book. The book's available, in all the major booksellers. And there's information about my coaching and my consulting all on indispensable-consulting.com.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much for spending so much of your day with us. This was really a lot of fun. Until next time.
Thanks, Nick. It was great.